Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am Kris. This is part 2, Benjamin Harrison, a president at the Crossroads. Before we get started, click on that, and there's a thanks button. You can, if you'd like to, click on that. Donate to the channel, request a video. Your name sponsors the video. Let's get into it.
76 Republican nominee for governor, Godliff Orth, had stepped down. A newspaper accused Orth of shaking down investors in Venezuelan bonds while he was in Congress, and Harrison was asked to replace him. He is introduced as Young Tip.
Republican parades featured veterans of Tippecanoe, veterans of his grandfathers who had voted for his grandfather. But those same parades also featured images, banners about the Hamburg massacre in the summer of 1876 in South Carolina. During a July 4th parade, there had been a conflict in the street between African Americans who were parading and whites. And Republicans featured this in 1876 to try and remind Northern voters that the gains of the Civil War were in danger of being erased.
Harrison's opponent in the race is Democrat James D. Blue Jeans Williams. Williams was a politician and farmer and wore his blue denims to political rallies and speeches, although as he grew more prosperous, he was known to line the inside of his jeans with silk. Harrison's own past was as rural could be, growing up on a farm that was never prosperous, and a father who risked financial ruin to send him to college. Like Williams, he had put those days behind him. But for the partisan press, his prosperity is fodder for the attack.
He's accused of being a kid glove aristocrat when he starts running for office in his own right.
Harrison dresses in Broadway fashion, with his hair parted in the middle and his beard trimmed like a row of tree box. The New York Sentinel.
The rural gambit works, but just barely. Williams ekes out a 5,000-vote win out of over 400,000 ballots cast. The Republican press wonders if Williams' family will attend his inaugural ball barefoot. But Harrison has bigger political fish to fry. In 1880, the death of Oliver Morton leaves a vacancy in the United States Senate, and Harrison is appointed by the state legislature. He advocates for a protective tariff and using the money raised for infrastructure spending, education for the children of freed slaves, and supporting the heroes who saved the Union. But to the Democrats, Union veterans equal Republican votes.
Since he was a general, his soldiers that fought under him, they loved him because he did everything he could to give them financial support, any kind of help that they needed. He was big on doing that, which unfortunately we don't do a very good job of that today. We still find ways to talk big, but we screw over people who do fight for the country. On a side note, he was coming back. He was, this is when he was in the Civil War. He was on a boat. I don't remember where it was going, but on one side was Confederates and the other side was Union. And so they were on this boat. He's on the top. And they were saying, just be on the lookout. Confederates might start shooting him, blah, blah, blah. He was like, okay. He's riding the boat. Hears some shots and sees, the puff of smoke. And he's like, okay. Starts telling everybody, get down what is the term? Below deck. People are getting below deck. He pulls out like 2 revolvers and just starts returning fire. Not revolvers. I think it was a handgun. And just starts returning fire and then reloading. And he's never moving and he's never getting shot, but he's returning fire. Then he goes underneath once he knows that they're safe. And he goes, okay, we've passed the tough spot. And everyone's like, you were up there the whole time? He was like, yeah, I was shooting back. And people were like, holy cow, this guy's insane. We loved it. So he had balls.
In Cleveland earns the title of Veto King. Over half the 400 bills he turns down are for pensions, and Harrison calls each veto tipped with poisoned arrows. But after one term, Harrison is out. Democrats have retaken control of the state legislature. He bitterly blames his loss on gerrymandering.
Benjamin Harrison did get smacked down from time to time. Like most politicians, he won and he lost. And he lost several times. The environment in which he rose to power was a very challenging, very competitive, very difficult environment.
Back at the Republican convention, Blaine has been outmaneuvered by Harrison's political team, which includes former Indiana Attorney General Louis Michener and John Wanamaker, a merchant considered to be a pioneer in the new field of marketing. Harrison wins on the 8th ballot to take on incumbent Grover Cleveland.
He was in his law office in Indianapolis. Michener sent him a telegram that said, "You are put in command." And Harrison nearly fainted. He went home up North Delaware Street to tell his wife, Caroline.
That's his home. You can tour it. It is massive inside. It's a big home, period. But it's really nice.
That he had won the nomination. And before he got there, he realized she knows, because there was a huge crowd out front of his house taking off chunks of the picket fence.
For his running mate, Harrison chooses New Yorker Levi P. Morton. Harrison will need the Empire State if he's to win in a country with very well-defined battle lines.
The solid South versus a almost solid Republican North. And in the two doubtful states that were most important, New York and Indiana, that's where the real nitty-gritty fighting went on.
The Democrats have designated Grover Cleveland as a child of destiny. The Herald wishes to warn its Democratic friends that we have a greater claim. The scriptural significance of the word Benjamin is the chosen one. Levi, the elect. We don't believe the democracy will have the temerity to go back on the scriptures. Indianapolis Herald.
This was party politics, with an emphasis on party. Polling places were the site of parades and picnics, with a shot of whiskey thrown in. There was passion, too, as voter turnout nationally hovered around 80%. You didn't need to know how to read to vote. You were just provided with a colored ballot and dropped it into a box. As for the campaign itself, less was more.
At that time, presidential candidates really didn't go out on the stump and barnstorm around the country. That wasn't seen as dignified.
It's called the Front Porch Campaign. He doesn't have to go anywhere. They come to him, and he speaks to them. They took specific groups to come to see him. He might talk to them about a particular issue that they were interested in.
He had his own stenographer take down what he said. Then you give it to the wire services. This is a major step in the creation of modern campaigning.
And what better place than the Crossroads of America to bring people together than Indianapolis? And I think that's the real genius behind it.
Later on, speeches and welcoming ceremonies were organized at University Park in Indianapolis.
They had over 300,000 people come and listen to Benjamin Harrison, over 80 speeches, starting right here from their front door.
Caroline participated in the campaign, putting people up at night, dignitaries coming to town. Things got pretty tattered, let's say, in the house.
They're surrounding the house, they're trampling the grass, they take pickets from the fence as souvenirs.
It's the White House or the poorhouse for us. Caroline Harrison.
The big issue in the 1880 election was the tariff. The Democrats wanted the tariff lowered to the lowest level possible, sort of moving toward free trade.
This was pure gold for the Republican campaigners. They said basically what you would have if you took Grover Cleveland's ideas is that you'd have people out of work, we'd have people's wages pushed down to the level of the pauper labor of Europe and that kind of thing. And that resonated with people. And Harrison hammered on that over and over again in the campaign.
I pity the man who wants a coat so cheap that the man or woman who produces the cloth or shapes it into a garment will starve in the process.
But what would a Gilded Age campaign be without a little mudslinging? And for Cleveland's people, what better club to use than some grandfathering?
His grandfather's hat is too big for his head, but Ben tries it on just the same. But it don't fit even a little bit on Benjamin Harrison's brain.
Not to be outdone, partisan tunesmiths reached way back, calling Cleveland a coward and a Southern sympathizer, and dredging up an old paternity suit.
Ben left his home, his wife and child, to serve up in the battleground, while Grover Cleveland stayed behind to sow his wild oats all around. So what's the matter with Harrison? He's all right. 9
different parties were represented on the ballot, including the Equal Rights Party. Belva Lockwood, their nominee, was the first woman to run, not as an independent, but at the top of a party ticket. Women could run, but they could not vote. As the election drew near, it was Harrison's home state that could be the making or breaking point.
It was a great scandal in 1888 because one of the Republican leaders, a man named Dudley from Indiana, sent a letter, perhaps real, to the Republican workers in Indiana, telling them to divide the floaters, those who were maybe not going to vote Republican or vote at all, divide the floaters into blocks of 5, and then assign one leader over that block to make sure that they voted, that they got their money for voting for Harrison, and that they did in fact vote for Harrison.
Harrison made no excuses for Dudley. In fact, he never spoke to him again.
He waited up, and everyone was getting nervous and frantic and looking at all the results. He waited for Indiana to come in. He said, I have my native state, and then he went to bed. And he said, well, I figured if I were president, I would need a good night's sleep, and if I weren't, then what did it matter?
When the dust settled, the North-South split played out exactly as expected. But the swing states all broke Harrison's way. He took the Electoral College 238 to 168. He won New York. He won Indiana. Ironically, he did not win his home city of Indianapolis.
When Harrison gets elected, he thanks Divine Providence. He is grateful to Divine Providence for his election.
Does he not understand how many men came close to the penitentiary to get him elected? Matthew Quay.
At one moment, as he's about to head for the train station with his family, he went into his library and looked around and just sort of tears welled up in his eyes, and he was sort of overcome by the moment, wondering whether he would ever come back, wondering what lay ahead.
To the music of the Marine Corps Band conducted by John Philip Sousa, President Harrison descended the long stairway into the inaugural ball as his country's centennial president, taking office 100 years after George Washington. The new century brought with it a new agenda. Harrison quietly begins to set in motion a vision for the country that he'd been developing since his time as a senator. He had the tools. Both houses of Congress were in Republican hands. He had a powerful ally, Speaker of the House Thomas Reed, who often created his own procedural rules and was called a czar.
Reed was one of the early not picks. Early picks. Early people thrown around for vice president. And I don't think Harrison was a fan. But I don't remember. I don't think Harrison was a fan of him, though. Probably because he would make up his own stuff.
And he had the funds. The government was running a surplus. But hold on, said the powers that be. First, the president had to deal with the spoils of war.
Party patronage is really important. People who work for the election of members of a party, they expect to be repaid with jobs.
People would wait outside the president's office in lines by the hundreds looking for jobs.
The old spoils system.
A form letter merely to be signed. Dear Sir, I appreciate the kindly feeling of Senator Quay and his colleagues of the Pennsylvania delegation. In the event of my election to the presidency, I shall regard the state of Pennsylvania as entitled to representation in my cabinet. Very truly yours.
And Harrison's response to this impertinent request?
I said no.
I think we have too many people in politics who are good at talking to people in small groups. We need people who are bad at that. And he had that gift.
George Hoare, Republican from Massachusetts, refused to name which Western senator said this. If Harrison were to address an audience of 10,000 men, he would capture them all. But if each one of them were presented to him in private, he would make him his enemy.
I do some.
He was very charismatic and gave great speeches. He was a lawyer, so he knew how to talk to people. He knew how to not only talk to like the juror, the jury, let me say that. He knew how to talk to you and get you on his side, very charismatic in that way. But one-on-one, he was a bore. One-on-one, he was, in a way, not very pleasant to talk to. And you didn't get what you would want, which was he could say, I want to get a bunch of people in this room jobs because, you know, you're going to, I trust all of you. So some people would be like, hey, were you going to give me that job? And he'd be like, well, what are your credentials? You know, what's your value to this office? They'd be like, well, you said, and he'd be like, well, yeah, that doesn't mean that that's you. And they'd be like, oh, I hate that guy. But that's just who he was.
Times feel like a hunted animal as my walks and drives and even my meals are taken with those who are wanting something.
Patronage was not the only burdensome custom of the day's politics. A turn-of-the-century president was obliged to defer to Congress, but Harrison finds that unacceptable.
I think Harrison's attempts to woo members of Congress is relatively new at this time.
He didn't sit back and, let people in Congress dictate matters. He was pushing, always pushing.
Persuasion often took the form of dinners at the White House. The kitchen served up meals with green turtle soup or roast duck, while the president offered a dish of arm twisting as dessert. He wanted action on the legislation that Grover Cleveland had been so willing to lay to waste with his veto pen.
The 1890 Pension Act enables elderly veterans, widows, mothers with no male breadwinner, who had a son in the Union Army, children whose fathers have died, to live without being reduced to pauperism. You can say that the Harrison administration made great strides in creating kind of safety net that we take for granted today.
But if Democrats balked at what they saw were attempts to buy a lifelong Republican coalition, they dug in over the issue of trade. Harrison promised high wages. They saw higher prices. Without a single Democratic vote, Reed wrangles a bill sponsored by Ohio Representative William McKinley through the House.
The McKinley tariff raised rates quite high, lowered some, but it also included a provision for what was called reciprocity. That is, it empowered the president to negotiate with foreign powers for trade deals that would essentially open up markets primarily in Latin America for American farm products.
Sound familiar?
Congress becomes a high-stakes chess match. Some causes will win, some will fall. But this is chess with a wild card. To find it, one only needs to look to the West, and an issue obscure to us today that brought about a fiery debate. 6 states have joined the Union: Montana, Washington, Idaho, Wyoming, North and South Dakota, the most during any administration, and something that Harrison had argued for as far back as his days as chairman of the Senate Committee on Territories. Mostly agrarian states and several with rich lodes of silver, they support coinage of the metal to bring bounty to miners and relief to the farm community.
Creditors in the United States wanted the money supply to be relatively small because every dollar they had or were owed would be worth more. Farmers in the West who had overextended themselves were deeply in debt saw silver as a way of lifting some of their debt burden.
Next, there are those who fear that with explosive economic growth in railroads and steel, too much power now rests with the consolidation of business. A new word finds its way into the American vocabulary: trusts. And there is Harrison himself, and an issue that is never far from his mind.
The colored people did not intrude themselves upon us. They were brought here in chains. They are now free. When and under what conditions is the black man to have a free ballot? When is he, in fact, to have those full civil rights which have so long been his in law?
I think that in many ways we can look at Harrison as someone who is making the point that the United States is a multi-ethnic nation, right? That these people are citizens. Black folks in the South are citizens just as much as white Southerners are. And there's certain rights that they are entitled to. And I think that's a powerful statement, especially coming at this time.
The debate cools, the votes readied. For consideration by the 51st Congress, Ohio Senator John Sherman's Silver Purchase Act.
On a side note, this is a story not related to Harrison. Not related to Harrison, but an interesting story. John Sherman was going to run for president in, I want to say 1880. Yes. So he was going to run. They were holding the convention in Chicago. You didn't attend the convention and put yourself up as wanting to be elected. You had somebody go and give nominate you on your behalf. So he had a friend who was also a Civil War general, named, why is the name slipping my, James. His friend James goes to Chicago, nominates him, gives a great speech. People are like, damn, all right. James was trusted, former general in the military, turned lawyer, politician, decided getting out of politics, wanted to get back into being a lawyer. So, and people liked him, they knew him. And they're like, damn, all right. So John Sherman gets on there. He's on the ballot. They had 40 ballots. John Sherman, winning all the time, but never hitting that threshold. I don't remember what the number was. On the 41st, after the 40th ballot, all the people come together and they're like, all right, we got to get something else happening because this is just not working. And somebody said, what about James, who gave the speech for John Sherman? That guy, he's pretty fiery, right? Why not? We know him. We like him. We trust him. He's an honest guy. So they nominate him. James goes from the 41st through the 46th nomination, wins. John Sherman finds out that his friend James Garfield, the future 20th president, got the nomination over him. He wasn't upset at all. Garfield wins, then gets assassinated 6 months into his term. Sherman's crushed because that was his friend. And he's kind of thinking, that should have been me. But after James Garfield gets a nomination, somebody came up to Sherman and they were like, you're loved in Ohio, but you have to make a bigger name for yourself nationwide. People don't know you. He tried again in 1884 and also in 1888, which is where 84. 84 Grover Cleveland, 88 Benjamin Harrison, and then 92, spoiler, was Grover Cleveland again. So after the 88, he decides, I'm done. This whole thing just isn't working out. In the meantime, he comes up with the Sherman Antitrust Act, and he decides, for trusts and stuff like that. So he comes up with that, which really gets used by Teddy Roosevelt, the 26th president. And we're talking about Harrison, so it's the 23rd. So it is going to be used down the road. He comes up with that, and somebody came up to him, and they were like, you could probably run for president again. Because now the nation knows you. And you've gotten out of the shadow of your brother. And his brother happened to be former Civil War general. You know where I'm going with this? William Tecumseh Sherman. So he decides, no. He ends up getting on board with Harrison, and he was in his 70s, I think 71, and didn't last very long in Harrison's cabinet. He just started suffering from severe mental decline, and I think he only lasted a year and a half or so before he resigned. But yeah, so just an interesting story about Sherman.
In which the government buys 4.5 million ounces of silver each month, which could in turn be redeemed in certificates for silver or for gold. The Antitrust Act, also named after its sponsor John Sherman, seeks to punish conduct which unfairly tends to destroy competition itself. But an impasse seems to be brewing over New Hampshire Senator Henry Blair's education bill.
It was pretty innovative for the time, right? Harrison supports this bill that would have provided federal funding to the states, specifically to put towards education, especially literacy. And there's a lot of opposition towards this. The bill essentially would have been applied to everyone. Black folks in the South, they're working hard to escape the legacy of slavery in an era when reading is criminal for many of them.
And the federal elections bill, co-sponsored by Massachusetts Henry Cabot Lodge and George Hoare, appears headed for rough waters.
What the 1890 election bill does is provide for federal supervision of congressional elections.
The Democrats portrayed it as what they called a force bill, meaning you're going to use federal authority to force the South to allow black people to vote.
Speaker Reed was able to get the Lodge bill through the House of Representatives. It was a narrow vote, but he got it through. Then it went to the Senate, where the tariff bill, the McKinley bill, was still pending. It became sort of a showdown.
But Harrison's window of opportunity has closed. In the midterms, Democrats retake control of Congress.
The Democrats were never going to let something like this pass. It was, their political power was geared upon suppressing the African American vote in the South.
They came back, it didn't happen, sleight of hand, and it never got passed.
The silver purchase, pension, and antitrust bills all pass. The Lodge and Blair bills do not.
And so the backlash to the Lodge bill was far more important than the effort itself, because it caused white Southerners to redouble their efforts to exclude African Americans from the political process. This is when lynching was at its peak in the United States, something that Harrison abhorred and denounced, but seemed powerless to stop.
Stymied by a hostile Congress, Harrison looks for ways where he can act unilaterally. It seems the country's affairs of state are a wide open arena for him. It's true he named James G. Blaine as his Secretary of State, but the plumed knight, as he is called, often reports that he is too ill to handle most matters that are on his plate. Or, once again, is he? Rumor has it that Blaine can't stand the heat of the Washington, D.C. summer, and whenever possible, he retreats to the coolness of his home state, Maine.
We're going to go ahead and pause it there. We'll be back with part 3. So until then, I don't really have much to add right now because it just ended. Plus, I don't really know the rest of the Benjamin Harrison story because I'm still in the book. So I'm going to end it here. Till part 3. Have a good day. Have a good night.